All right, let's go ahead. We're at time, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure some more folks will come in as we go, but just first and foremost, welcome to the Designing Your Career panel that we're holding tonight. This is the last webinar event that we're doing in this series for now. At the end, we're gonna let you know how to hear about future events that we hold, but for this series that we've been holding on these Thursdays, this is the last event. So if you've come to many of our events, thank you so much for joining. If this is your first time, welcome. Anyone who's here, whether you're a Pathstream student, you're thinking about becoming a Pathstream student, or you're just interested in the job search in general, anyone who's here today is part of our community. So we're thrilled to have you here and very excited to share some job search stories today. So there are some logistics to take note of before we get going. If you have any questions at any point throughout this webinar, there is a Q&A button that you can find. Make sure you put your questions in that feature, and we'll make sure that we either answer with through text, or we tackle your questions towards the end of this event today. And as always, a recording of the workshop will be emailed to you after the session. We'll also put it up on our public YouTube page, so you'll have that recording available to you if you want to reference it at any point. Today's agenda, it's pretty straightforward for this one. We're going to hear some stories from our esteemed panelists, and then, like I said, we're going to address any Q&A that you might have. Because this is the last session, the Q&A is going to be a little bit different today. Any question that you have whatsoever, you can ask it, and we'll do our best to answer it after we get through these stories. But today's goal is going to be a little bit different than what we've done in previous events. We know, from personal experience, from working with students every day, that, the job search process, it can be a pretty stressful time, right? For all the reasons that are obvious. It's tough to put yourself out there every day. It's super hard to deal with the rejection that can come sometimes with the job search, and picking yourself off the floor and putting yourself out there again. And so today we just want to kind of take a deep breath and let that go for a little while. And we want to share some stories about job searches in the past that are funny, because I think sometimes what you'll see is that once you get to that other side of the job search and you get a job and you can finally exhale and take a deep breath, you'll think back to all the things that happened to you during that process, and you'll find that, there was actually a lot of humor in there. You might not have been able to see it at the time, but sometimes the best medicine, as my grandmother and probably many grandmothers would say, sometimes the best medicine is laughter. So today, hopefully, we'll share some stories, we'll have some laughs, and you might even learn something in the process, because there could be some teachable moments in these stories as well. So we are going to talk to some of our wonderful people in the Pathstream community. Let's take a moment to get to know them. We have Leifer Sigurdsson, who's on the data analytics team here at Pathstream, Jahan Quayle, who's on the business development team, Johnson Fung, who's on the design team, and myself. I'll be popping in there every now and then. My name is Anthony. I'm on the learning design team. So this is all Pathstream family, very Pathstream centered event. And, well, once again, you're part of the Pathstream community today too. So you're part of the family as well. All right, let's jump right in, shall we? The first question that we're going to look at is, what is the most awkward moment you've ever experienced during a job interview? And I think for this one, Jahan, if we could start with you, I'd love to hear about the most awkward moment you've ever experienced during a job interview.
Sure, Anthony. And this is an easy one for me because I had stepped out at a job where I was already employed and was trying to do an interview very quickly on like my lunch hour, because it was nearby and just down the street. And when I got there, the interviewer said, "Why don't we just run out and get a cup of coffee? We can get to know each other a little bit more casually, and then we can come back and you can meet some other folks in the office." And I agreed. And as soon as we stepped out of the building, a bird pooped on me. So that was a rough start to our interview. I had no real context for his name was Kevin, didn't really know him that well. So that was a rough start to the interview, but he was great about it. I think I was pretty great about it as well, because even though I didn't get that job, and truly that was a mutual decision after I learned more about the role, wasn't exactly the right fit, but Kevin and I have stayed in touch. He's gone on to at least two other companies where he has reached back out to me to see if I was interested in joining him. So it was not the end of the world, obviously, although it was incredibly awkward at the time, not just because we had to immediately divert our cup of coffee to go to find a restroom, but then I had to return to my job to explain why I was like sort of awkwardly damp from having cleaned myself off. But not the worst thing that happened, although it felt pretty terrible at the time.
And so, Johan, that's like that's hilarious. I mean, not at the time, but like in retrospect, like that's incredibly funny. But I'm just wondering because during a job interview, I feel like myself, probably others, you're so focused on having everything go perfectly, and then you experience this moment where like something random happens, you have no control over, and but you're still in that moment, you're still in that interview, and so I'm wondering like how did you like keep a cool head? Like, how did you stay centered and focused when a bird just poops on your head out of nowhere?
I think I really don't focus on making everything go perfectly. I try to focus on the things that I can control. And really, the only element of that is myself. And so, whether I'm in a job interview or I'm out with friends, the first thing I want to do is clean myself off. And, but really, it's not, I think in that moment, it's important to realize like, this is not a reflection of me, clearly. It's just a thing that happened to me, and it wasn't catastrophic. I was otherwise fine. Kevin was certainly fine and unharmed. And you just try to really think about who you are, and less about the interview and sort of the evaluation. Because the truth is that if someone is going to evaluate you harshly because something happened to you, that's not probably a role that or a person that you really want to be interacting with long term. So I really just try to focus on what are the elements of this situation that I can control. And that's always me and my own behavior and how I treat the people around me. And I think that you'll probably all be just fine if you focus on that as well. There's always going to be something totally out of your control. And it might be something really silly and harmless, like a bird um, joining you for the afternoon. Or, but sometimes you encounter somebody who's not kind, or a variety of things that could sort of shake you in the moment. But I really just try to focus on the element of it that I can control.
That's yeah, incredibly wise. Johnson, what about yourself? What's the most awkward moment you've ever experienced during a job interview?
Sure. So I was interviewing for this job after maybe like 6 or 8 months of not working. And I had been backpacking and vagabonding like a young person. And so I was actually quite worried coming into this job interview because there was a big gap in my resume. And I was not doing anything productive for society for many months. And so when the interview started, the person was like, so, tell me what you were doing before. And I was like, well, I was doing a lot of traveling. I was exploring this place and this place, and they were just really interested in it, and they were like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, I've always wanted to do that with my life. I'm like, oh, so why haven't you? She's like, well, this job, it's like it's really time consuming. I'm like, oh, tell me about that. She's like, yeah, I have to work weekends. I'm like, that really sucks, doesn't it? I'm like, do you talk to your friends a lot? She's like, I don't talk to my friends at all. I'm like, well, it's sometimes good to take some time to like, really focus on yourself, reflect, build your relationships better. And she's like, yeah, I think so. And then we went a few more, back and forth about the job. And then I kept being back like, I'm like, do you really want to be at this job? Like, is this company really for you? She's like, I don't know. Anyway, long story short is after about 25 minutes, I convinced her to quit her job. And when you convince your interviewer to quit their job during your interview, yeah, anyway, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And yeah, and then a few days later, they were like, we're really happy to offer you for a second interview for this job. And I was like, no, thanks. But so I'm gonna stop there. I think you can ask questions. I have some lessons that I learned myself, but that was definitely like a once in a lifetime awkward moment.
That is an incredible. I don't think I've ever heard like a story like that where you during a job interview convinced the person that the job they had was not the right one for them. But I mean, was part of you, Johnson, was part of you as you were doing that, trying to like tease out like, well, is this actually a good fit for me? And like, is this actually a company that I want to work for? So were you were also, I would assume you were also like trying to figure that out for yourself, or how are you tackling that?
Yeah, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten that was really hard to follow initially, but now I've gotten used to it is you you are interviewing the company as much as the company is interviewing you, as exactly answering the question that was just put up in the chat. And that seems initially, especially when you're in a earlier junior position or entry level position, seems like a scary thing. But I like to think that if a company is willing to pay you to do work, it's because you're providing real value to that company. And in order for you to be able to do good work for that company, you're going to have to be in a company that actually values you and treats you like a good person, treats you real, right? And so for me, I always ask questions. I always ask the person about how they feel about their role, even if the job they're doing is completely different than the job I'm applying for. And that's really important for me to know. And so I think with this person, even after the first few questions, it was so clear just viscerally that they were not super happy with what they were doing. And that kind of rang some alarm bells in my head. And so, yeah, so I would say always ask questions. You are also doing the interviewing.
That's
And
so
wait,
int-
one more thing
Oh, please,
is
please.
that it might feel like it might feel scary to do that. You're like, will I come off as too confident? Will I come off, as rude? And the answer is generally not.
Hmm.
When I'm doing the interviewing and somebody's asking questions like that, to me it seems like this is a person who really cares about this job, who is thinking about this company in a deep way, and who will probably be a good example to other people if they're valuing these things. So I've never seen it as a negative thing when somebody asks a lot of questions about the company when I'm interviewing them.
That's so interesting. I'm wondering, Johnson, if you've experienced this, because like just thinking about my own personal experience and being in a job interview and maybe seeing some of the red flags that you're describing, but then also simultaneously suppressing that because I'm thinking, man, but I really want this job and maybe I've been out of work for a while. And so I don't, how do you like listen to those red flags despite maybe the other feelings you have of like, just I want any job that like I can get, like I'm at that point, you know?
Hmm. I mean, I think it's really hard, and I think it's a balance. I think what's really important is to figure out before the interview happens, when you're at the beginning of your job search, right? Or maybe just honestly anytime, but figure out what your deal breakers are beforehand.
Mm,
It's like going into any relationship, friendship, romantic, professional. It's like you want to know clearly what your red flags, what your deal breakers are before you start getting invested, before you start being in this place. Because in the moment, it's going to be really hard. In the moment, if you haven't had luck, and this is the only person or only company willing to engage with you, right? You're going to be tempted to go through it, even if all the red flags are there. And so I think defining those beforehand and having a really good support network, friends or family that you tell that to explicitly, being like, hey, do not let me join a company that is like this. Or, I think that can be very helpful.
yeah, that's a phenomenal point. Yeah, I think you're so right. It's really hard to like do it in the moment, and doing it beforehand could be a real strategic benefit. So that's, incredibly valuable advice. Leifer, Leifer, my man, what is the most awkward moment
So,
you've ever experienced?
all right. To get into data analysis, I actually went to a similar program to what we offer at Pathstream. I went to a program called Mission U. Our courses at Pathstream are far better than what I went through. But getting out of that and starting to apply with no experience whatsoever was really stressful. It took like, I don't know, 6 months, and I was a horrible interview as well, and just it was grueling. But I was getting interviews. I had a really well written resume and also a cover letter, which is actually how I got my most awkward interview. The guy really liked my cover letter, and I ended up getting an interview at a engineering firm in Portland. And I go in, I sit down with the CTO, I sit down with like two of the top programming guys there. And it's clear within 15 minutes that I am not qualified for this role. It's blatantly obvious to me. Maybe they hadn't figured it out by then, but what they were really looking for is somebody to build their data system from scratch. And I have the data analysis portion, but what they needed is data engineering and other skills. So I sat through that 2 hours, just horribly, horribly awkward. But I mean, I so appreciate the amount of time that they gave me. Just like it was valuable time that I feel like I wasted. Um, but just getting that experience and kind of taking any interview that comes your way, I feel like is something that you should do as you're starting to join, as you're starting to apply for jobs, especially with data analysis. There are the names blend together. A position could be data science, and that could be an intern level data analyst role, or it could be data scientist and be a doctorate statistic major or whatever. And it's really confusing in there. So I definitely recommend like breaking out of that bubble, especially if you're in data analysis, and kind of applying to those things that might not be exactly what you're looking for. And also, if you're ever in my position, going through an awkward interview that you're underqualified for, be sure to say thank you. I was like, so flustered and stressed and like freaking out on the way out the door that I didn't really like stop and thank my interviewer. And I kind of regret that. I just like, I knew I had wasted this time, but I just was so scared to like even say anything. So I ended up sending him an email. I probably owe him a second email, but yeah, I might do that after.
Yeah, Leifer, right after this, you could shoot him an email and tell him that he's on YouTube now, so he can hear about the experience that you
Yeah, I
had
should
on
send him this.
on the internet. I'm curious, Leifer. It sounds like even though like you were very like quickly, you're like, okay, this role probably isn't for me. It sounds like you were just going through that process, you were able to refine. Okay, this is the kind of role that I like am going to be applying for moving forward. So it sounds like there was a lot of value in that whole
Yeah.
experience. Am I correct? And am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, I would say I was able to refine, but through this interview and many others, I just realized that companies don't know what they're asking for really. And sometimes it's hard to know if you're qualified or not. Sometimes the job descriptions are very vague, and but at the same time, if you go through that interview process, you might there might be other roles within the company that you are set up to, or you're more fitting for. So
Yeah. So it sounds like, Leifer, if somebody is on the edge of like, should I apply? Should I not apply? You're saying, you know what,
apply.
just go for it. Just apply,
Yeah, I
right?
would say apply for sure.
Yeah, I think that's right. Cool. Well, those are great stories. I can't wait to hear the answers to this next question. So let's go to this one now. I'm curious, what's a slightly or super embarrassing thing that you do to prepare for interviews? Jahan, back to you. What's a slightly or super embarrassing thing that you might do to prepare for interviews?
I practice my intro out loud in a mirror.
Tell us more.
Um, this goes back, I think, probably even as far back as like even in middle school or something. But sometimes I used to get so nervous in going into either an audition. I'm thinking about like middle school play type of stuff, but I would get so nervous that I would be scared to prepare. And all that did, feeling unprepared is far worse than feeling over prepared. I eventually learned. And so if you practice whatever the piece is that you're feeling self-conscious about. And for me, at the time, it was really just feeling nervous about how I would introduce myself. You can imagine you go into a new setting, you're not exactly sure how you're going to be dressed compared to how the company's going to be dressed. Like there are so many different variables. And I would just practice introducing myself to the receptionist or office manager. I would practice how I would introduce myself to the person I'm interviewing with. I would practice how I would introduce myself or how what an encounter might be if I ran into somebody in the bathroom of the office. I would literally practice bumping into someone and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm here for an interview," or like truly, I think I'm on the other side of this now. But the point is that these things become practice makes perfect. And it's not about getting the lines memorized so that you can spit them out verbatim, but really the more you say it, the more comfortable you feel with the narrative and yourself. And so actually, I'm not even embarrassed about doing this stuff anymore. So there.
Yeah.
But truly, look in the mirror, and that is my go-to for preparing for an interview. It's frankly how I prepared for this. It's really sort of how I prepare for anything that where I'm going to be speaking and in a live environment.
And yeah, you are an excellent public speaker. So I think the practice is evident that you're putting in. I'm curious, has anyone ever, as you were practicing, have you ever had like someone kind of like stumble in and hear you practicing like awkwardly and be like, who are you talking to, John?
Definitely not.
Okay.
Those are all the variables I'm definitely removing as I prepare. It's happening me alone in my closet. No one is going to hear that. No, that is a risk factor I'm ready for.
Okay. You've got it all covered. That's awesome. Johnson, same question. What's a slightly or super embarrassing thing you do to prepare?
Mine is starting where John was starting and then going a little deeper
Okay.
and more embarrassing, which is I also practice a ton for interviews, especially verbal ones. But I practice word for word, like all of my stories. I have all these stories for all these behavioral things, right? Like, tell me about a time that this happened, or tell me about the time that that happened. And I've rehearsed them so much that they seem super rehearsed. And so then I practice pretending to not be rehearsed. So I practice stumbling, and I practice being like thinking about the answer before happening, and I practice laughing. Only my partner and all of you know this now. And so I'll be like, I'll literally practice like, oh yeah, that's a good question. Let me think about that. And obviously I know which story I'm going to tell. And I'm really like, well, there was this, no, actually, how about this one? Right. And then I would say it. And so, yeah, so I think practicing all of that to make it sound more authentic is probably the least authentic thing I do. And also embarrassing. And then I live with roommates. And so like I can't just do it in my room. It's really embarrassing, especially because they'll know that I'm doing the same story over and over again. So I just put in my AirPods and listen to nothing and walk down the street saying it out loud as if I'm talking to somebody on the phone.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm wondering why. Just a question that popped in my head as you were sharing that, Johnson, is like, why are stories so important during a job interview? Like, why would you be putting in such effort to like get the story just like exactly right?
It's fun for me, so it makes it less grueling. But I think more strategically, one of the biggest mistakes that I think I've made in interviews and other people make in interviews too is assuming that your interviewer knows anything about your previous job or anything about your previous company. Even if you're a data analyst and you're applying for a data analyst position and the person you're talking to is a data analyst, it's very likely they have no idea what project you were working on. They have no idea what you mean when you're like, oh, I was part of this team that this, and did that, right? They have no idea. And so when you put things into a story and you really talk through the ups and the downs, it keeps them there. Because I think when I don't do something in a story and I'm just spewing facts about what I did, I can see their eyes glaze over and I can see they're not really listening to me. And so for me, yeah, I have to put everything in a story.
Yeah, so well said. And for folks that are listening, if you were able to come to our previous event where Lauren went through her workshop on how to tell your story. That's really part of like why that workshop is so important. So if you didn't happen to attend that last webinar, make sure you go to our YouTube page and watch it, because to Johnson's point, it's an incredibly important skill and you can get better at it. And Lauren has a really great presentation walking folks through how to like go about doing that. So awesome connection to that, Johnson. Thank you. Leifer, what is a slightly or super embarrassing thing that you do to prepare?
I definitely need to upgrade my preparation process. Yeah, I have very similar. I will, stress out, sweat a ton on my way to the interview or preparing for what a Zoom interview. And I will talk to myself very loudly. And yep, just like Jihan, I did that for this. So, yeah, I'd say it's been a little while since I've interviewed. So I would say for any speaking engagement, I'll practice on repeat. And if I get too stressed out, which does happen, I'll like blast music as loud as possible, try and calm down, and then redo that process until I get it down. It's not foolproof, or at least for me, but yeah, that's my awkward, embarrassing.
No, I think it's so funny that we think of it as an embarrassing thing, and yet all of you do it, and I think a lot of people do it, and it's this like really great practice. So it's awesome to see that consistency between all of you. And I'll just share one embarrassing thing that I do that I don't. Maybe other people do it, maybe other people don't, but I will go into deep rabbit holes on the internet searching for the people that I am interviewing with, because I'm just like obsessed with finding whatever information I can find out about somebody to see if, oh, maybe we have like a common hobby, or maybe like there's a personality type that I have a friend who's like that. And so I can sort of gauge how I want to communicate with them. But yeah, searching through somebody's like Twitter feed from 2015 to try to give yourself a leg up, I don't know how effective that is. Maybe it's just embarrassing. I honestly, I like all your answers better. So let's go on the side of preparation and not going down Twitter rabbit holes. All right, next question. What is the number one thing people should not do during a job search based on your personal experience? So the number one thing people should not do in your opinion, and we'll start with Jahan once again.
I think it's really important to keep in mind the job that you desire. And so the most important thing to not do is to go wild applying to jobs that you don't want. And what I mean by that is you will likely you're going to apply to, certainly more than one job at some point. And that could be a very lengthy process where you might apply to dozens of jobs. And it can be frustrating sometimes to feel like I'm not hearing anything back. I don't even know, they haven't even acknowledged receipt of my application. You might really have a lot of uncertainty about where you are in the process. And that can create a loop where you start to feel like, okay, maybe it's me and I'm not the right candidate. And that's why nobody is getting back to me. And that makes you broaden your search to jobs that you don't want. Somebody on our team, as we were chatting about this, gave the example, don't apply for a job as a bank teller when what you want to be is a digital marketing associate. And that for me really crystallized the point that I was trying to make, because you just got to hunker down with the potential frustration, know that you're in it for the long haul. But applying for jobs and preparing for interviews, as we've just discussed, is exhausting and it's time consuming. And you want to conserve your energy for the roles that are really exciting to you. So if there's any piece of advice I can give you is when you feel frustrated, if anything, take a break, pause your search rather than going out and making it too wide and eventually of finding yourself applying for jobs, or worse yet, interviewing for a role that you truly already know you don't want.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice, Jahan. I'm wondering, are there any strategies that you follow that maybe, you know, when you found yourself in moments where you were battling like a compulsion, like you were like, I just want to keep applying to all these jobs and I want to get a job like so badly, and I'm just feel like I'm feeling really like compelled to just keep doing it, even though you know the best thing would be to like take a breath, take a step back, take a break. How are you able to like negotiate those tough moments to like err on the side of doing what you know deep down is the right thing to do?
Sure. So one is take a break. Your job future is not compromised by pausing on sending out cover letters for, a week or more. Just pause if you're not getting the results that you want. But the second piece of that is go back over the materials that you're submitting. Ask somebody to review your resume. There are plenty of tools out there that can help you. I mean, for resume building tips or how to sort of hack the algorithm, making sure that your cover letter uses the same words that were used in the job description, or that your resume matches searching for keywords as well, same kind of thing. So that's one thing. I would have somebody else take a look at it. Somebody who maybe is certainly somebody in the industry is always helpful, but honestly, just a fresh pair of eyes might help you in how you're crafting this package, whether it's your resume or your cover letter. So I would say that number one, just pause. You are definitely not compromising your long term success by giving yourself a little bit more energy for it by taking a break. And then two, revisit the materials that you're submitting. Um, who you are is not going to come across entirely, obviously. That's why there's an interview in your cover letter and your resume. So take a second look at those materials. The second thing I would say, or the third piece, I guess, is to look at any information you can find about the jobs that, or the people that are on the other side of the interview process. So, can you figure out who the hiring manager is? If not, can you figure out at least who it's going to be, what department it's going to be in? And is there somebody on that team who you could reach out to learn more about the company? That doesn't even have to be an enduring in-person request. I've found people so generous with their time on LinkedIn when you just send a message that says, "Hey, I'm interested in the company. Would you be willing to answer 5 to 10 minutes worth of questions?" I think that people can be surprising with their generosity in that respect. So those are kind of my three main tactics. But the number one by far is to give yourself a little break. Don't be afraid to revisit the materials that you're submitting, get a fresh pair of eyes on it. And then finally, find somebody in the company, whether they're in that department or not, you're going to learn something and it might help you position yourself better, differently, and so you can be a little fresher when you go back at it.
No, I think those are excellent, excellent pieces of advice. And that third point that you made, it ties so nicely to the first event that we ran in this series where Lauren went over how to conduct those informational interviews and how to network. And so if folks are out there and they're hearing that advice and they're thinking, gosh, yeah, I'd like to be able to do that, but I just don't know how to get those informational interviews, or reach out to somebody on LinkedIn to see if they would want to chat and network. Go back to that webinar event. That's like, we have it on our YouTube page, and check out how Lauren kind of walks through how to do it, how to do it. It's a really phenomenal resource. So thank you for the excellent segue, Johan. Johnson, same question. What do you think is the number one thing people should not do?
So I think mine is complement to Jahan's, a little different, but complemented, which is never, ever, ever not apply for a job you do want just because you think you're not qualified for it. Especially if it's because there's some bullet point in the job description that you don't think that you have. And I just want to, I think in all my whole career, for all of the people I've ever talked to, no matter how well educated, credentialed, how prestigious their background is, everybody feels like they're completely unqualified for the job that they're applying to. It just happens. It's like it's everybody psychs themselves out. Like I know somebody who is Harvard undergrad, Stanford grad school, like top 30, under 30 entrepreneur, like everything you can imagine to put in the newspaper. And they sent me their resume once. I like had this job I want to apply to. I don't think I can get it. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, okay, well, there's this bullet point that says you need to have done Google Analytics before, and I've never used Google Analytics before. And I was just like, that is the smallest bullet point on this. You are 10 times more qualified than this. And they're just like, I don't know if I can do it, right? And so the feeling you have of being underqualified has very little to do with whether you're actually underqualified or not. I would also say that I have never applied, I've never gotten a job where I matched all of the bullet points. And I've also never hired anybody that matched every single bullet point on the job description. By the time they get to the interview, by the time I get to the interview, whichever side of the table I'm sitting on, it's really about if the fit is good and if the experience I have and the stories I tell match with what they need in the role. And so I would say never ever like psych yourself out of applying would be my number one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that, because I think so many of us, we feel like the emotions that we're going through in a job search, of dealing with that feeling of like imposter syndrome, or feeling like, God, I'm just not qualified for this. I can't, don't feel like I can do it. Like, a lot of people think that that's just something they're dealing with by themselves. And I think the point that you bring up, it's so important, is that we all feel this way. We all are contending with and battling with imposter syndrome every day, and struggling with seeing our benefits as opposed to our deficiencies. And so I like what you're suggesting, of that, shifting that orientation to like, no, don't look at it and become focused on what you can't do. Try to actually see it as something you can. So thank you for bringing that up. Leifer, what about yourself? What would you say the number one thing people should not do is?
Cool. Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. Kind of don't put yourself in a box. I kind of touched on this earlier. Apply to roles within your bubble, but obviously not the bank teller role. Since that's a very similar response. I actually have another interview story that you should definitely never do. Never get frustrated in an interview. It might sound obvious.
Tell us more.
So I had this like pair programming. It's like where somebody is watching me write SQL. And his question involved the use of joins, which is like connecting tables together. And it was towards the end of the interview, so I was very stressed, and whatever. And he's kind of explaining to me that I have the wrong answer, and I kind of like I was obviously frustrated, but not like I don't know, not in a bad way, but definitely in a weird way. But I was giving like definitive answers that I knew the correct answer, and that was a mistake. If I had like accepted that I have the wrong answer, I don't really know what I'm talking about, I think the interview would have gone a lot better. And like I was already on the like third round with these people. He did seem to like me, and then I just had this stressful experience that it didn't work out. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story, Leifer. It's not easy to share these stories sometimes. We don't live in a culture where people are always honest about the things that don't go right. They're more likely to share the things on social media that put them in the most positive light possible, and so we don't sometimes see that that's buttressed by some negative experiences like the one you just described. I'm wondering, in retrospect, what did you learn? Like, what did you learn about how to handle potentially frustrating situations from being in that moment?
Yeah, I like if you don't know something in the interview, say you don't know it. Like be honest, especially when it comes to programming. People are Googling things all the time. That's totally acceptable. Um, if you're able to leave the interview and come back with an answer that like solves their problem, there are better ways of going around it, and definitely don't just say you don't know it, and that's okay sometimes. It's kind of, I guess, the lesson.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Man, I would be so impressed if a candidate couldn't answer a question and then sent me an email afterward being like, I researched it and this is what I found. I'd be like, that's even better than if you got it right on the spot.
Mhm.
That's such an interesting point, Johnson, because it's, yeah, it's taking an opportunity, it's taking a moment and seeing the opportunity in it. Um, have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen that before or heard of anyone doing something like that?
We
I think
actually,
oh, sorry, go ahead later.
we actually had a student that just reached out about an interview question that she wasn't sure how to answer, and um, I mean, I guess we helped her, but but she figured it out, and the company actually gave her an opportunity. Because you don't know this, come back with an answer, and then we'll talk about next steps. So it's definitely available.
Very cool. And Johnson, were you going to share something as well?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think there had been 2 times in the past where somebody answered a question in a way that they didn't think was like the best answer they could have given, and they followed up in an email after. Always follow up, but in the follow up email after, they were like, I thought about this more, and here's an idea. And I think both of those people ended up being hired at the companies I worked at. So
I love that. That's a really smart tactic. Yeah, to fall. I didn't. I'm going to take that tactic because that's not something I thought of before. But yeah, to follow up via email and to, yeah, show the thought process, show the ability to learn and think and grow. I really appreciate those answers and that advice. Okay, this would not be uh, an interview or a panel that I'm leading without asking this question. This is my favorite question to ask. If any of you out there ever watch the Pathstream podcast, I ask this question every time at the end. Jahan and Johnson, who've both been guests on the podcast, have answered this question in another context, but I want to bring it back because I think it's such a powerful way to end with a burst of positivity and optimism. So what's the nicest thing that someone has ever done for you during a job search or when you were undergoing a career transition? So Jahan, start back with you, please.
So the nicest thing that someone has ever done for me was assure me that I had transferable skills. And what I mean by that is I had spent at that point the bulk of my career doing one thing. And just like many of you, I wanted to make a very hard pivot into another direction, totally different industry. I had no prior experience with. Or it was tangential. I would say I wanted to get into education. As you know, I work at Pathstream, and my first job was as an English teacher. So, really loosely tied to the same industry, right? And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I felt like my years of experience working somehow should be able to bridge this gap for me. And even though I didn't quite know how to make that transition, I had multiple friends assure me that focus on the skills that you have. Those skills can be applied to any industry. The industry is actually irrelevant. Here are the things that you know how to do, and you can do that just as successfully in the industry that you want to move into, in my case, education, as you have been doing them in tech, consulting, and these other places where I had spent my career. And it was really that time and effort of someone basically doing that cross referencing alongside me that gave me the confidence to go out and say, okay, yeah, I do have these transferable skills. I have already demonstrated them. I'm just going to demonstrate them now in this new industry. And I would say that I needed that before I had the courage to put my foot forward, and really go out there and try to make this pivot. And I would say that in terms of paying it forward, I have done the exact same thing to a friend of mine. She worked in the wine business for a long time, and for a variety of reasons wanted to get out, wanted to get into tech, and she's now working at Salesforce. So I know that I'm naming all of our partners here, but they have nothing to do with this. But she and I said, Carol, same thing to her. You have all these transferable skills. Here's what you, as a manager of a team, here's how that translates into your own ability to manage your book of business as a sales lead. and we really went through it together. And so just a few short years later, total ability to pay it forward, but by far the most helpful thing that someone has ever done. And now I would never let a change of industry hold me back from demonstrating the skills that I have been in my career.
That's all. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. You have that relationship and that support, and then you paid it forward. That's yeah. That's awesome answer. Johnson, same question. What's the nicest thing someone's done for you
Hmm.
during a job search?
I think like a lot of times when you're doing a job search, there's also the dynamic of leaving the place that you're currently at. And, I think for me, like I was finally, after a long time where my mom would say things to me like, my friends come and ask me what you do and I have no idea what to tell them. I finally landed this like prestigious corporate job. And it was like they were like so proud of me. And I was able to like support my partner. And for like a few years, I was like in this thing and I felt really good about it. But because of the way the job was and how stressful it was, I had like back pain, I had medical issues, I was like super stressed out all the time. I was just like not enjoying myself. And I was thinking about leaving to go do something else. And a big part of my brain, well, I didn't realize consciously, but like after talking through it with some friends, I realized that a big part of not wanting to leave or being scared of jumping off to the next thing was disappointing these people who were close to me, who had been so celebratory of the thing I got originally. And they kind of knew, but didn't really know how bad, my day to day was. And so I think finally I like talked to my partner about it and they were like, like, you're not doing this for me. I just want you to be happy. Like, I would not think of you differently. And you should talk to your parents about it to see what they think. And so I talked to my parents about it and they're like, that's crazy. All we want you to do is like be healthy. And we're only happy for you because we thought you wanted this other thing. So, go pursue the thing you want to pursue. And, given that they're parents, they're like, as long as it pays kind of like what it paid before, and as long as you have the same job stability, I'm like, okay. But I would say the nicest thing they ever did was give me permission to not need to think about them in terms of how my career was going or what I needed to do for myself. And the nicest thing was also my partner giving me permission to ask the people I thought I was letting down, am I letting you down? Right. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, love that. Love that. Yeah, to be able to ask and then receive that support. That's, so such a benefit, such a positive thing. Leifer, same question. What's the nicest thing someone's done for you?
So yeah, during the job search, probably I mean a lot of nice things, referrals, LinkedIn recommendations. I've had those things, and it's hard to weigh anything against one another. But I would say like the nicest or most valuable thing is something that I actually learned in my previous data analytics bootcamp. Was just kind of learning how to ask for help. Learning, like, I asked for those LinkedIn, a lot of the LinkedIn recommendations, and I asked for referrals, and I reached out to people, and sometimes that's pretty hard for people to do, but people do want to help. A lot of people want to help you. They just don't know. They don't know what's going on in your life, and I don't know. It's something that I guess is a nice thing that I did for myself, and I also was taught, and it's led to more nice things, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can be hard sometimes to ask for help and to learn how to do that and to practice that. That's, obviously an incredibly useful and valuable skill. And I'll just share mine super briefly. We have a few more minutes, and for people who are listening out there too, if you want to start getting your questions in the Q&A, because this is, like I said, our last session. We're happy to take any question today, no matter if it's random, if it's just something that's unique to you. Like, don't hesitate, put it in the Q&A. We're more than happy to address any lingering questions you might have. But the nicest thing that someone did for me, it wasn't actually during a job search. I would say it was when I guess I was going through a career transition. It was one of the first jobs I ever had. I worked at Jack in the Box, which is this fast food restaurant in California. And I remember it was one of my first days, and I was working the register. And if anyone out there has ever worked a fast food job before, you'd be surprised at how complicated that damn register can be. I mean, it's, you look at it and you're like, what am I operating a NASA control center here? Like, what? I just want to put in a burger and fries. Like, why is this so hard? But it is, or at least it was about 15 years ago when this happened to me. So my first day there, a guy comes in and he just orders a burger, small fries, like that's it. And I'm looking at this keyboard and I'm like, I have no idea where the burger and the small fries are. And I'm just gonna go ahead and just press some buttons and hope for the best. And I remember ringing him up at the end of it and I said, sir, your bill is $17.98. $17.98 for a burger and small fries. I said, yeah, I don't know. It's what the register's telling me. And he paid it. And I was starting to panic because I knew deep down, like, oh, something has gone terribly wrong. But I'm in too deep now. I took the money. I told him I got the order right. Oh God, what am I going to do? And so I look up at the order screen where I see what I've punched into the keyboard, because that's how you make the order. And I see a large curly fry, double cheeseburger, small strawberry shake, 2 tacos. Like, I don't know what I must have punched in, but this is the order now that I'm making for him. And I just felt so nervous. And I was like dealing with such panic. Like, I just didn't even think like, oh, I should just talk to him. I should just correct this. I was just going through the motions. And so I hand him the order at the end of it, and he looks at it and he just smiles and he says, oh, okay, this looks pretty good. And I see him sit down and I see him start to sip the strawberry shake, and he kind of smiles to himself. And I was like, this is the nicest thing that anyone, he didn't give me a hard time about it. He knew that it was my first day. And he just said, you know what? I'll eat this. No big deal. And like after that, just seeing that simple kindness, calm down, felt like I could start to work the register. And I never forget it to this day. Like, that's just one of the nicest things that anyone's ever done for me. So thank you for letting me share that story. For all you listening out there, we say this every webinar, but if you're interested in one of our Pathstream programs, please, please, please visit our URL, pathstream.com/programs. We have courses in digital marketing, data analytics, Salesforce, and project management. And we have a new course that Leifer worked on to a large degree. So our man Leifer on the panel, our new Python certificate. So if that's something that's interesting to you, by all means, get in touch, check it out, and let us know if that's something you want to pursue. So we can, like I said, we can address any questions that have come in, or we can just chat about any lingering issues that anyone might want to get into depth with. So Lauren, curious what you've been seeing in the chat or going through in the Q&A.
Yeah, there's been some really great questions in the chat, which we've been answering, and Johnson's been chiming in there. I don't have any open questions, but I always would welcome any panelists to kind of share anything that maybe they didn't say, but they like want to make sure they get in before we close tonight.
I'm going to underscore Jahan's comment about getting your resume reviewed by somebody else. Just get it looked at by somebody else all the time. Even if I will offer anybody who's at this webinar, if you send me your resume, I will review it. I don't even know if I know your industry or anything like that. Even for typos, I'll go through the thing for typos. Open offer, but absolutely do it. Don't send it without having somebody else look at it.
Thank you, Johnson. Anybody else? Any final thoughts?
Hey, Lauren, just real quick, is that resume review, is that something that Career Services does?
Oh yeah, we definitely do that. So when you're a Pathstream student, when you're finishing up your certificate, we provide that resume review. We'll review your LinkedIn. So there's a lot of services that we provide at Pathstream. And if you want to ask for a review by Johnson, I can make sure to forward to him. One question coming in. Felipe, thank you. Being that you know us students enrolled in Pathstream, do you have anyone who wants to hire a Salesforce administrator like me? And he put his LinkedIn. That is great. Way to get your name out there, Felipe. We will, I know you're working with, I believe Anthony as your career coach, which is great. And we will continue to send jobs your way. But if anybody on the call happens to know or need a Salesforce administrator, Felipe is available. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions for tonight. And I really do appreciate our panelists. We're going to have more webinars coming up in the fall. This is the last one for this series, but in the next couple of months, we'll be launching a new series of webinars, and we hope to see everybody there.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to all our guests. Wonderful, and we'll see you again real soon.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.